Welcome to the DIY Honda Garage channel. Welcome to this troubleshooting presentation on diagnostic trouble codes P0351, P0352, P0353, and P0354, which pertain to ignition coil circuit malfunctions in the Honda CRV models from 2011 to 2016. These codes specifically refer to individual cylinder ignition coils, number 1 through number 4. Each ignition coil is crucial for converting the battery's low voltage into the high voltage needed to ignite the air-fuel mixture in each cylinder. If these coils particularly malfunction, it may lead to poor engine performance, increased emissions, or other related issues. Understanding and diagnosing each DTC is vital for restoring optimal engine function. In this guide, we will explore a detailed error description, possible causes, symptoms, and a step-by-step troubleshooting process tailored to each specific DTC. The diagnostic trouble codes P0351, P0352, P0353, and P0354 indicate a malfunction in the ignition coil circuits for cylinders 1 through 4, respectively. The ignition coil is essential in the ignition system as it transforms the battery's low voltage into high voltage, which is necessary for creating a spark that ignites the fuel-air mixture in the engine cylinders. In a typical Honda CRV, these coils are located within the engine bay, directly mounted to the cylinder head, making them easily accessible for inspection. If a coil fails, it not only affects engine performance, but can lead to increased emissions and potential long-term damage if not addressed. Diagnosing these specific DTCs requires a methodical approach, following each prescribed troubleshooting step. There are several possible causes behind the ignition coil circuit malfunctions indicated by DTC P0351, P0352, P0353, and P0354. A primary reason could be a faulty ignition coil itself. Wear and tear over time can often lead to failures in generating the required spark. Additionally, wiring issues such as short circuits or open connections between the ignition coils and the powertrain control module, PCM, can also contribute to these error codes. The PCM is responsible for controlling the ignition coils, so a malfunction in the PCM can mimic ignition coil issues. Before performing any repairs, it is essential to identify the root cause accurately to prevent unnecessary part replacements. The symptoms associated with DTC P0351, P0352, P0353, and P0354 typically include engine misfires, which manifest as rough idling or stumbling during acceleration. You may also experience a marked decrease in fuel economy due to inefficient combustion. Another common sign is the illumination of the check engine light, CEL, which serves as an alert to the driver that there's an issue within the ignition system. Recognizing these symptoms is critical, as they can indicate not only minor inconveniences, but also potential long-term damage to the engine if not promptly addressed. Connecting a diagnostic scanner can lead to quick identification of the issue, enabling timely repair. The first troubleshooting step outlined for diagnosing DTC P0351, P0352, P0353, and P0354 involves verifying the problem through a series of diagnostic actions. Begin by turning the ignition switch to the on position, which powers the vehicle's electronic systems. Next, utilize the Honda Diagnostic System, HDS, to clear any stored diagnostic trouble codes, including those pertaining to the ignition coil circuits. Following this, start the engine and monitor for any pending or confirmed DTCs that may reoccur. If the same codes appear after these actions, it confirms a recurring issue that necessitates further examination. Alternatively, if the codes do not reappear, this could indicate an intermittent failure, potentially due to loose connections or poor wiring. In the second step of troubleshooting, the focus shifts to checking the ignition coils directly. Begin by turning the ignition switch to the lock position to ensure that all electrical systems are off for safety before performing any physical adjustments. The next move requires you to swap the ignition coil from the cylinder that flagged a DTC with that of another cylinder that did not. This helps determine if the issue is isolated to the ignition coil itself or if it resides in the wiring or PCM. After exchanging the coils, start the engine again and check for any repeating DTCs using the Honda Diagnostic System. Should the DTC reappear at the position of the swapped coil, it verifies that the ignition coil is indeed faulty and needs replacement. Step 3 of the troubleshooting process involves verifying the integrity of the wiring linked to the ignition coils, specifically focusing on fuse A17. First, ensure the ignition switch is turned to the lock position to safely carry out checks. Next, locate fuse A17. This is a 15A fuse positioned within the underhood fuse and relay box, which protects the ignition coil circuit. After identifying the fuse, inspect it visually or test it to determine if it is functional. If the fuse is intact, you can proceed with further tests. However, if the fuse shows signs of being blown or damaged, it must be replaced, and the underlying issue causing the failure in the IG1 coil wire must be diagnosed and repaired. The fourth step involves checking the ignition coil relay. Begin by removing the ignition coil relay labeled as A from its position in the underhood fuse and relay box. The relay serves as an electrical switch, allowing power to flow to the ignition coils at the appropriate times by responding to signals from the PCM. After removal, test the relay using either a multimeter or a relay tester. If the relay fails during testing, it will need to be replaced. However, if it tests good, the diagnostics can continue to the next step to confirm if other elements within the ignition circuit are causing the DTCs to appear. In the fifth troubleshooting step, attention shifts back to the wiring connected to the ignition coils. Start by reinstalling the ignition relay that was previously removed. Next, disconnect the 3P connector from the problematic ignition coil to facilitate safe testing. Once disconnected, turn the ignition switch to the on position and measure the voltage between designated test points. The correct voltage should be present. If it is, this indicates that the IG1 IGN coil wiring is intact. If no battery voltage is detected, this suggests there is an open circuit in the wiring, and further investigation into potential breaks or damage in the wire between the ignition coil and relay must occur. The sixth step requires checking for continuity in the PG coil lines. Begin by turning the ignition switch to the lock position again to ensure safety. Then, visually confirm that the ignition coil 3P connector remains disconnected. You will now measure continuity between the designated test points to see if the PG coil wiring has any faults. If continuity exists, it confirms that the wiring is functioning properly. On the contrary, if there's no continuity registered between the test points, that indicates there's an open circuit in the PG coil wire, necessitating its repair or replacement to restore proper functioning of the ignition coil circuit. Step 7 focuses on the IGN pulse lines. Commence by jumping the SCS SRS check connector line with the HDS, which is a safety measure to avoid unintended airbag deployment during testing. Following that, detach the PCM connector C, specifically the 49P connection, to enable you to check for continuity. Now, look for continuity between the appropriate diagnostic terminal of the ignition coil and body ground. If continuity is present, it indicates that the wiring is intact. If there's a gap in continuity, this reveals an issue in the IGN pulse line, which needs repairing to ensure that the PCM can effectively communicate with the ignition coils and manage their function correctly. In the 8th and final troubleshooting step, we reassess the continuity of the IGN pulse lines. Once again, ensure the ignition is in the lock position, same as previous steps. You will be checking between the designated terminal of the ignition coil and the appropriate PCM connector terminal. If continuity exists, this indicates that the wiring from the ignition coil to the PCM is free of damage and functioning correctly. Should continuity be absent, you will need to repair the open wiring between the PCM and ignition coil. Additionally, if the PCM isn't running the latest software, an update is prudent. After ensuring everything checks out, refer back to the vehicle's service manual to verify that all connectors and aspects have been reassembled properly. Final repair verification is crucial for confirming that the repairs made were effective and that the ignition system is now functioning correctly. Begin by turning the ignition switch to the lock position once more, ensuring all previously disconnected connectors are securely reattached. After making the connections, switch the ignition back to the on position and reset the powertrain control module, PCM, using the Honda Diagnostic System, HDS. This resets any previous codes and prepares the PCM to learn the new parameters set by the repairs. Finally, check for any pending or confirmed DTCs to ensure these ignition coil malfunction codes do not reappear, confirming that the system is operational and free from faults. Preventive maintenance plays a vital role in avoiding ignition coil malfunction and related DTC issues in your Honda CRV. Regular inspections of the ignition system, including visual checks of the ignition coils, wiring, and connectors, can identify potential problems before they escalate into failures. Maintaining good wiring integrity helps avoid issues with short circuits or open lines that can compromise performance. Additionally, ensuring the PCM is updated with the latest software allows the vehicle to function optimally with the latest calibrations. Establishing a routine maintenance schedule and adhering to recommended service intervals can greatly reduce unexpected troubles and prolong the longevity of your vehicle's ignition system. In conclusion, understanding the significance of diagnostic trouble codes P0351, P0352, P0353, and P0354 is vital for maintaining the reliability of your Honda CRV's ignition system. These codes relate to specific cylinder ignition coil circuit malfunctions, requiring methodical troubleshooting processes to accurately identify and rectify. During the diagnosis, ensure to follow each step diligently to prevent unnecessary replacements. Moreover, implementing preventive measures such as routine inspections and software updates plays an essential role in safeguarding against future issues. Staying proactive with maintenance not only enhances vehicle safety, but also contributes to its longevity and performance. Please like and subscribe to the channel. See you next time!